Okay, and one quick announcement. Well, I guess a couple of announcements. A couple of people have from class have come down with, you know, illness, COVID-like symptoms or whatever. If that happens, just message me. Take care of yourself first. We'll figure out the homework or extensions or replacements later. So don't stress about that. Also, as we're getting closer to the end of the semester, we're going to be having, things are going to be getting more and more stressful over and above what they've already been. So my current plan is to not give homework over the weekends from now until the end of the semester, so you can play catch up in some of your old classes or other classes over the weekend, or have time to study or have time to do things at home, as you have some other responsibilities that were not planned for when you first came to school. So I'll do that starting this week because I realize that the homework is starting to take a little bit more time because you have to kind of play with stuff and things like that. So we'll roll with that. And but like I said, if you're having any illness situations, just let me know and we'll work it out. So you don't need one more stress in your life. We're all kind of rolling through this together, and I'm confident we'll get through this. My major goal, especially since everybody can, convert this class to pass fail if they decide that, they don't like their final grade, or they didn't perform at the level that, they thought they could if they were under their normal circumstances. My main concern is making sure I get everybody prepared for the next class. Frankly, I've never been a big fan of grades, so that part of the thing isn't really a major situation for me. I want you to learn the stuff and ultimately get your degree and get released into the wild and go and change the world. And that means you need to learn the stuff and have practiced the stuff, and one way or another, that's my ultimate goal. So don't hesitate to discuss missed assignments or something like that if it was things other than, laziness. Okay, so let's experiment with some JSON stuff today. But before I go any farther, I do have the share going. Yeah, okay. So before I jump into the code, I want to clarify a couple things. So based on some of the comments on that I read in the homework assignments as I was going through and grading, let's talk about this a little bit. Why are we storing things in files? So when we first started with our little world thing, or even when you just roll back and think about the entire semester, we have been storing things locally in our program, and they get reset each time we restart the program. So what has the consequence been of this? So tedious code that is pretty messy looking. So if you think back to our first rendition of our cave crawler, then the 90% of main was us creating all these rooms and creating all these exits and attaching exits to rooms and all this stuff. So it was fine, it was palatable, but you could imagine that any larger world than that would start driving you nuts. So while it's good for testing, we have an object, we want to make sure this object functions, so we'll go ahead and create an instance of it, we'll add a exit to it, whatever. It's still, let's call it a temporary solution. Whereas if you think about your modern day pieces of software, whether it's a video game or Microsoft Word or whatever, it maintains its state through launches of the application, right? If you open up Microsoft Word, it has a little, it probably opens up the previous file you already were working on, but it also has a thing for like opening recent files and things like that. It remembers where you left off. All right, so we need to have some way that's like kind of offline, not part of the running application, to kind of keep track of things that we want to persist between runs of our application. So that's one rationale. So, we would like things to persist through runs of our application. So we need to get them stored outside of the application's runtime. All right, so we have some options for doing that, and we're kind of starting old school, and then we're going to roll into the more modern. So, the first option is to use file IO, which we are dealing with right now, to store stuff. And then we'll call this upgraded option is to use a database. Now, within each of these, we have some options. So if we think about our file IO up to this point, our first attempt number one was we invented a representation language for storing our data. All right, so we created that thing where we held the title, and then we held the description and our exits and things like that. Attempt number two, which is where we are right now, we adopted a known representation language, being JSON, to store our data. Now, what we'll do next, probably next week, is look at a relational database like MySQL or PostgreSQL. I think we might use PostgreSQL because there's some good built-in libraries for it for Python to store our data. But before we even do that, we'll probably use something called SQLite. So we can call this kind of a single device relational database. And then we'll go to kind of higher end ones, and these are made to be server-based for multiple people to be accessing at once. More enterprise level, not quite enterprise level, but more enterprise level. All right, so what we're seeing here is kind of our evolution of ways that we can store things offline so our application can remember things. But we're also wanting to keep track of, keep this idea in mind that, why program? We want to automate things that make our lives easier. Now, I realize that maybe you would not have sat down and said, hey, I'm going to create this dungeon crawler, that was forced upon you, but replace dungeon crawler with some other application that you think would be interesting to write. And you want to come up with ways to create that would be, make your life easier. So, where are we going with this? So we want to have one program that runs our game. We want to have one program that conveniently lets us create our data files, and then have a data file that stores the state of our game. All right, because one thing we probably are starting to notice now is we've replaced one level of tediousness with almost another level of tediousness. Even though JSON is nice and structured, it is somewhat tedious to write that. So the idea is that we, we have replaced that main with a whole bunch of code in it that was starting to get ridiculous with another, with now this file that is just as inconvenient to write. So what do? Maybe we write a program that lets us create our rooms and exits and stores the creation in a file in JSON format. All right, so we're about to close the loop on that. All right, so any questions about that? I wanted to just kind of connect some dots there that based on some questions that were in the submissions for the homework. I guess I'm trying to give you the why are we doing what we're doing right now. It's actually a pretty important concept. And to be honest, file IO in many cases has fallen out of favor. It's not decided as a possible solution by modern day programmers because databases have become kind of the go-to move for everything. Sometimes you don't need a database. Sometimes you don't need you don't need to go out and get the gas-powered power tool when you can use a little battery-operated screwdriver. It might be more convenient. Again, we want to think about using the right tool for the job and also remember that we have all sorts of tools laying around and one is not necessarily better than another. They just allow us to solve certain kinds of problems. Maybe they have limitations, but with those limitations sometimes comes with the benefit of them being relatively simple to use. Okay, so let's talk about JSON a little bit here. If you remember in the homework, I mentioned that you would want to look at how collections in JSON worked. And we can actually mimic this. So I'm going to kind of play around with our JSON library a little bit today. And we'll see where we get. And we might just end up redoing the assignment for today for Friday, if you need to take a second pass at it type thing, because I think several people struggled with it. But we'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll add one little thing or something. But let's experiment a little bit with this library. So I'll come over here. And we had our object test from JSON. And let's see, did we use file test? Was this our, yeah, so we're going to experiment with these. Let me move this guy. What would I just do? I thought I did something good, but I didn't do something good. Oh, that was the X to close it, not the, it looked like it was the, but there we go. Mission accomplished. It looked like a little arrow to me, like move it to the right. All right, so if you remember, we kind of made this correlation with JSON and dictionaries last class. All right, so the idea is we started off with a little dictionary and we added a first name, a last name, an age, things like that. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to create another. I'm going to actually make this a little bit more complex to make our thing a little bit more realistic. So we're going to have a title, make it a little bit more connected. So we're going to call this cave entrance. And then we're going to have a description. And we'll call this a damp room or something, I don't know. All right, and then we're going to have a collection of exits. Now, a title is a string. A description is a string. Our exit, so a room has a collection of exits. These guys are going to be a collection type. So what are we going to hold in there? We're going to hold a list. So it's going to hold a list of exits. In our case, it'll be an exit object. Go ahead.
Do we need to like define those in the as an object before we use it in the JSON file?
No, yeah, you will. I'm just
Like what you're doing right there, or do we only need to do like what you did with your name, like L name?
well, it depends what you want to store. In here, I'm storing just a string, and they already exist. If I want to store an exit object, as you're saying, I'm going to have to define an exit object. So I'll have to have a class called exit. But I mean, nothing keeps me. So I just want to keep it simple at first. You know, nothing keeps me from just having exit directions here. So maybe.
So when you're working with those like JSON stuff, you need to define those in Python to be able to work with them.
Yes, but try not to connect it to JSON. At this point, what we're dealing with right now, we haven't even done anything with JSON. All I'm doing is I'm creating a dictionary that has a bunch of name value pairs in it. We're not even touching JSON yet. We don't get to JSON until this line right here. Make sense?
Okay.
So yeah, so try not to come up with this idea in your head that you need to have special rules for JSON. It's not. This is Python just like we've been doing all along. I'm creating a Python dictionary like we've been doing for a while. It's going to have 3 name value pairs. Title is the name, the value is a string. Description is the name, the value is a string. Exits is the name, the value is a list. Lists are things that we've had all along as well. And this list happens to have, in my current example, just strings in it. So for my directions for my exits, we'll upgrade those in a few minutes to an object type like an exit, where, to your point, if we're going to have something that we're going to store, whether it's in a list, a dictionary, or in JSON, that is outside of what comes with Python. For instance, Python did not come with our exit objects that we invented. We would then need to define those things in order to build those things, right? It came with strings, so we can just use them freely. It came with lists, so we can use them freely. But right now, to keep it simple, I'm filling my list with strings because we already have those available to us. We don't have to define anything else just for our example right now, because what we're doing is we're exploring this idea of how collections work in JSON.
Are they similar to what the arrays are?
Say this again?
Are they similar to the arrays? Because when I was doing research last night,
They're exact. A list is an array in JSON.
Okay.
Yep. So we're going to see that here in a second. So that's what we're exploring. But I'm taking you through the process of what I would have done in exploring it. So I would have gone and looked it up. I would have researched it a little bit, but then I would have come in and done. I mean, so this is kind of like scratch paper. You know, when you're working on a project for a math class or something like that, you kind of have that piece of paper where you jot some stuff down on, or you have an extra file open on your computer, whatever it is.
Got it. Okay, so you're just showing us how you would have gone around and seen how stuff works. I'm messing with it.
But this is also what I would do if I were you and I'm experimenting with stuff. I wouldn't dive in and start making changes to our actual program that's currently working, let's say. I would have a second program open and make sure that I understand how this tool works. You know, so if you want to think about the real life example, you go to Home Depot, you buy some new saw. You know, the first time you use that saw is probably not on your actual project. You probably get a piece of scrap wood out and you make sure you understand how the saw works and what it's going to do before you start cutting on things that matter. So we're doing the same thing here. We're, you know, kind of experimenting with how the JSON library works and how you know, what things look like and how do we store things before we actually, you know, we're understanding our tool here before we dive into the project and start using that tool. All right, so it's no different than real life, and I want to emphasize that connection, is that, you know, it's just like bringing that brand new tool home from Home Depot. We want to play around with it before we use it for prime time. We're doing the same thing here in our little sample program. All right, so I'm going to actually just cut this extra stuff for the moment. So far I've imported JSON, but I'm not using any of the library here. So I've just created a dictionary with a bunch of name value pairs. The 3 kinds of values I'm storing is a string, and a list. Specifically, it's a list of strings. All right, so if I run this guy, you see I get my, my name value pair for title, my name value pair for description, and my name value pair for exits. And notice that it's storing it as a collection type, storing it as a list. And this is JSON format, like we talked about last time. All right, so this is how collections work in JSON, or at least this is giving us a view into how collections are likely to work in JSON, because I've advertised that dictionaries in Python follow the rules of JSON. So I'll go ahead and put our code back in here. So we'll go ahead and we will take our object, which is our dictionary we created up here, and we'll convert it to JSON, and then we'll print that out. So I'll go ahead and get rid of this code down here so we can just focus on those two things. So this is what my dictionary looks like after I've created it. This is what it looks like after I've converted it to JSON. And we see that they're very, very similar to each other, except for the uses of the double quotes. All right, so this line right here is JSON, and this is a collection in JSON. So that's actually a JSON string. Okay. So if I had that JSON string, that's what this guy's called, JSON string. And I go ahead and load a string. What string am I loading? I'm loading JSON string. So we can pretend like we read this in from a file. Where this string is where it lives is relatively unimportant. I got this string from somewhere. I could get it from a file where I have a giant JSON string, or I can write it in here where I've created a dictionary, converted it to JSON, and then I'm for some reason converting it right back. So that's the difference between dump S and load S. Dump S dumps a JSON string given a dictionary. Load S loads a JSON string into a dictionary. So this will be a dictionary that comes out of that. We named it Y before, but now we just gave it a little bit clearer name, let's say. All right, and I can go ahead and say a dictionary title right here, and we'll see that it did get converted back to a dictionary. Because once I convert this thing to a JSON string, I can't say give me title. Guy's gonna scream at me and he's gonna say, look, you've this is a string, you're trying to treat it like it's a dictionary. It's not. You use JSON dump S on your dictionary here, and that guy gave you a string. He's a normal plain Jane string. He looks like this. And even though when we printed out our dictionary, it looked very similar, this is how Python visually represents its dictionaries to us, the programmers, so we can kind of see how it lays out, because JSON is a comfortable format for us to read. But these two lines here are different kinds of animals. This guy here is an actual dictionary that lets us operate with dictionary stuff. So if I were to print out object at bucket title, that'll work, because object is a dictionary. So I could say, give me the value associated with bucket title in my dictionary. Give me with the variable name title. And this will work. It'll give me cave entrance. But then once I use dump S from the JSON library, it will convert this dictionary into a string, a plain Jane string. It looks, when we print it out, like Python's representation of a dictionary, but it does not behave that way. Its data type is different. Object is a dictionary, JSON string is a string, okay? So it's yelling at me saying, hey, your indices must be integers, because I can like access bucket 4 of a string, for instance. And that'll give me, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2, this is 3, this is 4. That'll give me that T if I want bucket 4, because I'm working with, the type of thing I'm working with here is a string. Does that make sense? So even though they look the same when we display them, they are different kinds of animals. This just happens to be how Python displays stuff. All right, so object is a dictionary, JSON string is a string that happens to be in JSON format. So then down here, I'm gonna go the other direction. I have this JSON string. Now where I got that JSON string is unimportant. In our case here, we built our JSON string up here, right? This is where it came from. I built a dictionary, I used the JSON library to convert it to a JSON string. That's where the string came from. I could also write the string by hand. I could go and I can just create this string. Nothing keeps me from saying JSON string 2 is equal to that. I can just hard code that string in there. All right, and that's a JSON string as well. So the first one I used by creating a dictionary, then using the JSON dump s function to convert that dictionary into a string. This other one is I just wrote this. I stole it, but I wrote this. All right, plain Jane string. Another option is I could have this string stored inside of a file. Like that, and I could read that string in. So we've done file IO stuff. We look at our map builder. Now we can use the built-in JSON thing, or we can just use our own read function, which I actually think the JSON thing is built on top of it. So we open a file and then we read from that file. And the name of my file is called object_test.json. Just steal those two lines here real quick. Call this guy the JSON file. And the name of my file is called object_test.json. That's where I stored that guy, that string. And then we'll call this guy JSON string 3 is going to equal the JSON file read. All right, so now before we do anything else here, I'm gonna cut this stuff out. I'm gonna print JSON string JSON string 2, JSON string 3. And we notice here, oh, sorry, I gotta go into this and take the single quotes off there. They're not required when I put it in the file. I wanna make sure I'm showing you identical stuff. So notice here, this is JSON string 1, or string, this is JSON string 2, this is JSON string 3. I have 3 strings here. They are strings, normal plain Jane strings, but they came from 3 different sources. The first one came from me using the JSON library to convert a dictionary. The second one came from me just hard coding a string. The third one came from me reading in from a file.
Out of curiosity,
Sure.
With the collections or arrays, when you're trying to just read a specific one or just like run a loop between the two, how would you just call the array versus?
We're going to do that here in a second.
Okay.
Yep.
Because that was one of the things that I struggled with last night, and I wasn't able to
that's why
figure out how to do that well.
Yep, that's why we're going through this exercise, is based on some of the questions. So we'll definitely get there. If I don't answer that before the end of class, hang out for a minute afterwards, and I'll show you. But we'll answer it before the end of class. All right. So notice I have 3 identical things here. They are all strings. That's the kind of animal they are. They're not dictionaries. They're not some weird JSON thing. They're strings. These are Python strings. All right. So I can access the individual buckets. I can go through and grab, I can reverse them. I can do things like, we've been doing with strings all along. All right. These are normal strings, but they were created 3 different ways. This was a dictionary converted to a JSON string by the JSON library. This was me hard coding in a JSON string. This was me reading in a JSON string from a file. Okay. So ultimately, I have a JSON string. One way or another, I have a JSON string. And at this point in time, these 3 things are all identical to each other. All right, so now, and you notice here that I can use the JSON library to load directly from a file here. So instead of reading like I did, where did I do it? Right here, I used my normal file IO when I read from it. Notice JSON has something called load, which reads from this file, but it reads it in as JSON. So now let me show you what I mean by that. So I'll print this guy here. Okay, now notice, where am I showing? I'm printing the title, so let me get rid of that here for a second. I'll just leave that in there. It's not a problem. Okay, so now I have 4 different things here. String, 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 but this last guy is actually a dictionary. He's a JSON representation of a dictionary. So how did we get him? We opened the file, and then we used the JSON library to load that file. So that's equivalent to me using the JSON library to load S, my JSON string 3, which came from a file. All right, so this saves us a line of code. So if I want to do it myself, I want to manually do it through normal file IO, I can create my file object. I can read in from that file object the entire string. Then I can use load S, which is load string, on that string to give me the dictionary. If I go ahead and print a dictionary here, we'll see that that guy and the last guy look the same. This is JSON format in a dictionary. This is JSON format in a dictionary. These guys are all strings. So this guy right here, I got from reading in from my file into a string and then loading that string using the JSON library into a dictionary. So it took me 3 lines of code to accomplish that. Down here, I read in, I created the file object, and I directly read in and converted to a JSON dictionary in 1 line using the JSON library. So this load function accomplishes this line plus, well, here, let me just move this line up there so we don't have to jump across a bunch of prints. So this 1 line here does the equivalent of these 2 lines here. Pick your poison. Do you want to use the JSON library directly to load from a file into a JSON dictionary? You can. If you want to use plain Jane file IO to open a file, read the string in from that file, then convert that string with load S, load string, into a dictionary, you can do that as well. They accomplish the same thing. So if I come down here and I print out the dictionary, we see these last 2. They look a little bit different. They use single quotes instead of the double quotes. These are dictionaries. Now, you're probably not going to remember that when you go and look at them. We just kind of know what these are. I know that these guys are strings because that's what I produced. That's the type that I made, was a string. I know that these guys are dictionaries because that's what load and load-s produces for me. These guys build dictionaries out of a JSON string. All right, so now I should be able to say from this guy, give me exits. From this guy, give me exits. And we'll see that I get, I have to give it as a string because otherwise it thinks exits is a variable. So there is my exits, the value associated with the name exits in that dictionary. And that value, this guy right here, is a list. So if I say from that list, give me bucket 1, from that list, give me bucket 0, it gives me the south, it gives me the north. Bucket 0 is north, bucket 1 is south. Actually, I said bucket 1 is south, bucket 0 is north. That's where these came from.
What if you're just looking to pull like a destination ID or something like that from?
Well, then those would be rooms. So let's step this
like
up.
out of like say in the exit you had like a destination ID to where it was heading towards. Is that something that you could pull from there too without having to use a bucket like 0, bucket 1?
Well, yeah, if it came back as an object. So we would represent our room. So let's upgrade now, and let's make these guys exit objects, at least similar to what we had. So I'll come up here and I'm going to build a class called exit. And my class called exit is going to have a init. And we're going to say direction. And then room ID. Destination room ID is maybe what we called it. Doesn't matter, we're just showing an example here. And we'll go ahead and say self.direction is equal to direction. Self.destination room ID is equal to destination. Make sure I spelled this guy right. All right, so we have those pieces from that. Now, what we might want to have from our exit is we might want to have, because let me do this. So I'll come down here, and for my object here, instead I'll have it start off as exits, just an empty list. And then I'll go ahead and say object at bucket exits, which is a list, dot append, and we'll put a new exit in there to the north with destination room ID of what do we call it, like R1, something like that. Actually, if we're trying to mimic our map, we'll call it R2. And then we'll have a second, we'll put a second thing in that collection. We'll have one going from to the south. R1, you know, whatever. Just I'm storing some objects into this list. And then I'll go ahead and print out that dictionary. Oh. Self direction, destination room ID. This is F there. Okay, so I try. Well, actually, let me just delete the stuff below here so you can see the code. Go ahead and run this. So here is my string representation of my, well, here's what my dictionary looks like right now. I haven't done anything with JSON at this point. I have my title, I have my description, I have my list of exits, but notice these guys are stored as memory addresses. So here's the pointer to that first exit. Here's a pointer to that second exit. Okay? So we need to now have a way of converting objects into JSON. All right? So what I can do, now, that's on our way in. That's on our way back out when we write to it. That's kind of what's coming up in the next assignment. But if we were going to do that real quick, I can have a def to JSON. And I think that might even be the name of the JSON serializable thing. If you saw a minute ago, I'll put that code back in that was giving the error. Notice it's screaming that my exit objects are not what's called JSON serializable, which means that they cannot be automatically converted to JSON. But if I just, let me go ahead and we'll just do it back here. Just to show you the full picture here. Python, JSON, serializable. I think you just have to have two. I think it's called toJSON. Make a Python class JSON serializable. Yeah, toJSON. So you, here, I'll steal this line and I'll explain what it's doing. There is already a default value. I don't think you need that part. Actually, I'm going to need just toJSON def. Okay. And is it all lowercase, all uppercase? No, the SON is lowercase. So toJSON self, and this guy will return JSON dot dump string self. I think we could just leave it like that. We don't need this other piece. This other piece is telling it how to treat it. It's saying treat it as a dictionary. So lambda is an unnamed function. So take O in as a parameter and just convert O to a dictionary. But I think that's how dump S will work regardless. So we'll test that here real quick. So what I just did here is I taught my object how to convert itself to JSON. We'll see if it screams. If it does, we'll put that other piece in there. Yeah, I have to put that other piece in there. So this is lambda O. And we're not going to talk about lambdas right now, but I'll switch this underscore dict. And you wouldn't have had to do this piece yet. This is for the other direction that we're getting to. This guy is my object. I want to just get up to that point. That should have made it. Let's try one thing here real quick. And then I'm going to go back to what I was doing before. We'll talk about this next time. I'll come up with the right syntax for this. basically you need a function that will output the string version of this object in JSON. So we can either do this, or we could actually just write our own thing that will put the direction and the destination room ID in JSON format, actually hard code the string in there. Relatively unimportant for what we're doing right now. But what I want to do here is I want to add a function that is going to be, so let's call it def exit from JSON. And this guy is going to take in a JSON string. And what he's going to do is he's going to create an exit from a JSON string. So if I have a JSON string representation of an exit, he will produce for me an exit. All right. So a JSON string can be converted to a dictionary using JSON dot load s. And I'm going to load JSON string. So this will give me the dictionary equivalent of this JSON string. Presumably I have a direction and I have a destination room ID. So now I will create an exit. This guy is equal to exit a dictionary at bucket direction and a dictionary at bucket destination room ID. And then I'll return an exit. All right, so for right now, because I have these exits in here, when I actually append my exit, and here, let me just, what are we doing on time? I will cheat for a second. To JSON. And what I'll do is I'll say dictionary is equal to the empty string. I'll say a dictionary at bucket direction is equal to self dot direction. A dictionary at bucket destination room ID is equal to self dot destination room ID. And then I'll go ahead and return JSON dot dump s a dictionary. And just in our last couple seconds here, let me show you what I just did there. I'm going to not convert this guy. I'm gonna put the rest of the code back in for a second here just so you have it for our example. Then I'm gonna cut it out of there. Okay, so I have my objects there, but then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say for an exit in object exits, we'll go ahead and print an exit dot to JSON. Did I have it all caps? Yeah, I did. So there is my JSON representation of my exits that I could then store in a file or something like that. So similarly, if I had in my file something stored like this, I could bring it back into Python and convert this back into an object by having a function inside of my exit that does that. And we'll go ahead and look at that next class. So what I'll do for right now, I've given you a little bit more to chew on, is I'll actually extend the previous homework assignment to be due on Friday. So if you want to take what we did in class today and try to improve your solution, if you already have a good solution, then you have no homework for Friday, but I'll just move the due date to Friday. And then we'll finish up this lesson on Friday and start angling towards what if I want to read in and exit from a file. All right, so questions about any of that?
We're able to re-upload a new submission, right?
Yeah, you should actually be able to upload an infinite number of submissions.
Okay.
And then when I grade them, it always grades to the most, the highest grade. So I might grade it 3 times, and you might have different grades on them, but whatever the highest of those is the one that you'll end up with. That make sense?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Other questions? And I'll post this code as a starting point, but this code as of right now, when I put this stuff back in, just so you have our examples, it does crash because we haven't made it serializable yet, but I just want you to have all the syntax that we looked at today. All right, I will see everybody on Friday.
I had a quick question about something else.
Sure, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just blanked for a second. With the new major and everything, that's mainly just the tracks, right? And
Correct.
the advantageous part of that is that it sits on your diploma that you have a focus in.
Yeah, so you'll have a bachelor's. So if you convert to our new major, which all of you should, because I mean it's not costing you anything, it'll just make your diploma look better. It's you will end up, you'll take all the same computer science classes that you would have taken anyways. What will have changed is what you effectively will take a concentration associated with the electives you choose rather than just picking blind electives that don't show up on your diploma. So what will end up happening is you have to take at least 1 concentration, but I recommend you take at least 2. You can even fit a 3rd one in there. So your diploma will end up saying Bachelor's of Science in Computer Science with concentrations in software engineering, cybersecurity, and AI and robotics, something like that. So that's what will actually go on your transcript. So when you apply for a job, they'll see, oh, you have a bachelor's in computer science, and you specifically focused on cybersecurity, AI, and software engineering.
I also noticed that some of the math was actually a little bit lighter in the new major too compared to the old one, and then the
it actually
logic is gone too.
Yeah, there is a couple. Yeah, the math is we don't require calc now. We just require statistics, and then so yeah. I mean, everything about the new major is going to be that doesn't mean you can't take the calc class, but everything about the new major is an improvement to your quality of life. Yeah, so that's
then there's a internship requirement as well.
There is an internship requirement. Yeah. I have a feeling that so we officially have required the internship, and the hope is that that works out for everyone, but I'm sure there's going to be some circumstances where a student's trying to graduate on time and they haven't done an internship yet, whatever it is that we have to swap.
Yeah, that was the only thing that was somewhat how the economy might be heading in that was
right.
Somewhat.
And we have flexibility there. So, I mean, I'm kind of unofficially telling you this, but let's put yourself in the situation where you're trying to graduate in May.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have your internship yet, and you know, for whatever reason, maybe you had trouble finding one, maybe you had a death in the family or something like that, so you kind of lost a summer when you were going to do your internship, whatever it is. You know, we have the flexibility to just say, okay, well, instead of the internship, let's take an extra 3 credit hour CS elective, and we'll count that as your internship.
Okay.
And then you still graduate. So I mean, it'll all work out. But I think emphasizing the idea of having to have a internship really does benefit you. So I mean, whether it's required.
Yeah, I mean, I was planning on doing that anyway. It's just
Yeah,
I was
right,
just curious
right. Whether it's
about what
required or
that
not,
was,
you should still
because
do it.
in the off chance that the economy doesn't rebound quickly after this, it doesn't want to be
Sure.
like.
Yeah, it won't be a problem. You'll still be able to graduate. It's a signature from me that says that you can take the second artificial intelligence class instead of internship, and you've met the requirements.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a non-issue. All right, anything else?
No, I just got to go figure out fix my code and not get errors.
Yeah, but this is good. So I mean, hopefully you banged on it quite a bit.
Yeah, I think I might have been a little bit not asking enough questions lately, so I'm just getting a little bit stressed about everything going on. But
yeah, no, I get it. So, and you know, so I'm going to extend this one, and then we won't do homework over the weekend, but I'll still push our logic forward. So if you want to enhance your thing over the weekend, you can. It just won't be required. Just to give people a little bit of a breather, since you know, things are becoming more and more stressful, right?
Yeah, well, if I have any questions about my code or anything, I'll put those on Slack. I'll probably put them in the 200 chat, so people can benefit from them as well.
Yep, absolutely. And you know, people reply pretty quickly, and I reply on there. So yeah, 100%. Okay. Well, I will see you on Friday if I don't hear from you before.
Have a good one.
Yep. Take care.